field after the Ghawar field in Saudi Arabia. It's in free fall decline. It's producing a third or a quarter of what it was producing at its heyday. Mexico is expected to go from an exporter of oil to an importer of oil in the next 5 to 10 years. So forget Mexico. Venezuela has been a good supplier of oil to the United States, and it does have a lot of oil, but the management of PDVSA, PDVSA, the national oil company of Venezuela, has been staffed with loyalists to the Chavez regime rather than professionals, and many energy analysts believe that they have damaged the productive capacity of Venezuela's oil fields. So some of you may think that that was for good purposes, and we could have a discussion about that as well, but few people believe that Venezuela is capable of increasing its supply. So we can't count on Mexico and Venezuela. Russia has a very large supply in Kazakhstan. We could turn to them, but this means more reliance on authoritarian, corrupt regimes dealing with state-owned companies like Rosneft or Krasnodar Gas, which there are a lot of Gazprom companies that are closely associated with the Kremlin in one case, and Nursultan Nazarbayev, the dictator of Kazakhstan, on the other. And besides that, we have to compete with China, which has fewer scruples than our companies do about bribery and corruption and the like. So we can get more oil from these two countries. They both are promising, but I'm dubious that we can rely on them a great deal for our needs. Again, I'm happy to talk about the benefits of that if anybody wants to. So does that mean we have to go back to the Middle East after all that good news I told you earlier about how where our reliance on the Middle East is declining? I think it's going to be very hard to avoid in the future, given that, except for Canada, and if we make a decision on environmental grounds not to rely more on Canadian tar sands. And Canadian tar sands at best are going to provide 2 or 3 million barrels a day. And we need to import 10 million barrels a day. Where's the rest going to come from? We can't count on Mexico anymore. We can't count on Venezuela for much. Nigeria is problematic. Russia and Kazakhstan is problematic. We're going to have to go back to the Middle East. And as you could see, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE, 5 of the top 7 reserve holders are in the Middle East. Now, historically, U.S. reliance on Middle Eastern oil has always been associated with military involvement. It goes back to 1945 when President Roosevelt met with King Abdulaziz of Saudi Arabia and agreed to protect the royal family militarily, indefinitely, in return for exclusive rights to Saudi Arabian oil. And that led to a establishment of military bases in Saudi Arabia for training of the Saudi military, arms sales, and everything else. Then when Iran was taken over by the Islamic regime in 1979, and the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia looked threatened, President Carter made this military threat explicit when he said, as it says, that the flow of oil from the Middle East is of vital interest and will use any means necessary, including military force, to protect oil. And this is called the Carter Doctrine. At that time, the U.S. didn't have military forces to carry out the Carter Doctrine, so Carter created a new command, the Central Command, whose area of responsibility includes all those countries that are highlighted on the map. I should add that since the establishment of the Africa Command in 2007, Sudan and Ethiopia and Somalia and Kenya are now under the jurisdiction of the Africa Command. Egypt remains under the jurisdiction of the Central Command. And in accordance with the Carter Doctrine, I would argue that the U.S. has gone to war on 3 occasions, in 1987 and 88, against Iran in Operation Earnest Will, when the Iranians were threatening Kuwaiti ships, and the U.S. put American flags on Kuwaiti tankers, making them American, and then fought against Iranian ships in the Persian Gulf, turning the tide in that war. We became an ally of Saddam Hussein. Then when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, the first Gulf War, and then in 2003, which I believe was really a continuation of the first Gulf War. Please, if you disagree, let's have a conversation about that. I believe that all of these wars were tied to the Carter Doctrine and the belief that the protection of the free flow of oil from the Persian Gulf requires military action by the U.S. when necessary. I would argue that this remains as much a principle of U.S. foreign and military policy today as it was in 1980 when Carter issued his doctrine. This is just an expression of that by then Vice President Dick Cheney in 2007. This was aimed at Iran, and President Obama has made similar comments to the effect that we're not going to allow anyone to threaten the safety of the Persian Gulf. What's different today from the past is that the United States faces competition, geopolitical competition in the search for oil. There's another major power that not only seeks oil from these countries, but is prepared to use military options in a way that nobody else has for a very long time, and that's China. And China is competing with the United States in many of the same arenas and with the same means. China gets a lot of its oil, for example, from Iran in the Persian Gulf, from Sudan, increasingly from the Caspian Sea area, from Africa, and wherever China goes to get its oil, as we do, it follows with arms sales, military aid, military assistance, and all of the rest. And this is leading to an increased arms race in the Persian Gulf area, not between the U.S. and Russia, as was the case in the Cold War period, but now with the U.S. and China, providing arms to the opposing local powers. This picture shows Robert Gates, one up here, and then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. But this arms sale is now very much alive under the Obama administration. China has also created its equivalent of the Africa Command, or its equivalent kind of military organization in Central Asia, called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, founded in 1995. It includes it includes all of this, most of the stands: Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, not Turkmenistan. Iran is a observer member, and this organization, although its public face is, as it says, cooperation and development, has a military dimension, and the military dimension is very much a geopolitical aim is to drive the United States out of the Caspian Sea and Central Asian area. All that said, I I think the leaders